Imagine a country where 1 in every 4 men is addicted to a deadly drug. A drug so powerful it stops farmers from working, soldiers from fighting, and students from learning. Now, imagine that same country goes from having 20 million addicts to being almost completely drug-free. In just 4 years. Sounds impossible, right? Well, that's exactly what happened in China. This is the incredible story of how China faced an epidemic bigger than almost any other in history and completely destroyed it. How a nation that was divided, poor, and weak turned its greatest weakness into its greatest strength. By the 1950s, the country had eliminated opium addiction, almost entirely a feat that had failed under empress warlords and even the nationalists. Here, in this video, we're going to explore the shocking methods, the immense human cost, and the dramatic transformation that made this possible. China's opium crisis didn't start overnight. By the early 1900s, it had taken over the entire country. 1 in 4 men, around 13.5 million people, were addicted. In some coastal areas, that number was as high as 90% of the population. 2. This wasn't just a personal problem, which was a full-blown national disaster. Farmers couldn't grow crops, soldiers couldn't fight, students couldn't study, and government officials were openly using opium in their offices. The economy was bleeding silver. Attempts to fight back had already failed, time and time again. The Qing dynasty tried a 10-year plan back in 1906. Banning cultivation and registering addicts, even publicly burning opium pipes. And for a while, it seemed to work. Consumption in some areas dropped by 1/3. But by 1911, the dynasty collapsed, and with it, any organized resistance. And used the profits to fund their armies. Birth between 1928 and 1933. This forced cultivation was a major cause of a famine that killed 6 million people. Even the nationalists' 6-year opium suppression plan in 1935 failed. Sure, they executed some traffickers and opened a few clinics, but the government itself was profiting from the opium trade. Controlling it became a way to fight political rivals and make money. So, by 1949, when the Communist Party took power, over 20 million people were still addicted. Nothing had really changed. Then, everything changed. The new government, led by Mao, had a completely different approach. It represented corruption, weakness, foreign humiliation, and all the decay of the old China they wanted to destroy. Their strategy was brutal, efficient, and had 3 main parts: destroy production, eliminate trafficking, and rehabilitate the addicts. First, production. Requirement. New opium poppies required huge fields to grow. So, they linked opium eradication directly to land reform. Large estates were broken up and the land was redistributed to peasants. Without those massive plots, growing opium on an industrial scale became impossible. In regions like Guangxi, every single poppy farm was uprooted. In minority areas where opium was a traditional source of income, farmers were forced to plant food crops instead. Rice, wheat, corn, anything but poppies. Second, trafficking. The government was absolutely ruthless. They compiled lists of suspected smugglers, and arrests happened in massive waves. The penalties were severe. Large-scale distributors were publicly executed, over 800 in total. Twos of thousands more were sent to prison for up to 10 years. Entire communities were placed under surveillance, and neighbors were expected to report on each other. There was simply nowhere to hide. Third, the addicts. a day. Addicts were required to register and follow strict detox schedules. Some were sent to treatment centers, but many more were sent to labor reform camps. Here, they worked from morning till night, farming, making shoes, or doing other forms of hard labor. It was harsh, yes. But it also gave people structure, food, shelter, and a new purpose, something to replace the void that opium had filled. And propaganda was everywhere. Anti-drug messages filled newspapers, posters, and radio broadcasts. Public trials and the executions of drug dealers sent a clear and terrifying message. This was a new China, and there was no place for opium in it. The results were staggering. By 1953, just 3 years after the campaign began, most urban areas were effectively drug-free. Official numbers weren't released at the time, but the change was undeniable. When China started registering addicts again in the 1990s, they found only about 70,000, compared to the tens of millions just a few decades earlier. Rural areas took a bit longer, with some minority regions continuing to secretly cultivate poppies until 1959. But eventually, even they were freed from widespread addiction. Think about that for a second. A country with millions of addicts, decades of failed attempts, a corrupt government, and a shattered economy kinda turned all of that around in just 4 years. It didn't happen through mercy, negotiation, or gradual reform. It happened through absolute, uncompromising force. It was a combination of strict law enforcement, total social restructuring, economic incentives, and forced rehabilitation. The result wasn't just fewer addicts, thieves. It was a powerful demonstration of what a centralized government could achieve when it treated a social crisis as its #1 national priority. The campaign reshaped society, strengthened the power of the state, and sent a defiant message to the world. China would no longer be weak, humiliated, or controlled by outside forces. The opium epidemic that had almost destroyed China was, for all intents and purposes, gone. Farmers returned to their fields, soldiers were fit to fight again. Children could finally learn. The deep scars of addiction remained for many, but the national crisis had ended. And the lesson from all this? Solving massive social problems requires more than just words or good intentions. It takes a clear vision, unwavering determination, and a willingness to take decisive, often painful, action. China's story shows us that even the deepest, most impossibly seeming crises can be overcome if a society is united and willing to face the hard truth of what it will take. What do you think? Could these methods ever work today? Let me know in the comments below. And be sure to watch our next video, where we explore another dramatic chapter in modern history. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that change the way you see the world.